The belief of the Confederates is primarily mistranslated as the function of assuming that David, as the assumed general of the intelligence oversight function, is merely military police conducting law enforcement at the national security level, which facilitates the ability to correct against the crimes of the double agents loyal to the white supremacists and others who are cooperating with them, which are systemically supported by the Confederate magic from the KKK wizard terrorist operations, which illegally classifies the evidence of their crime, criminalizing their crime, which is designed to protect them and extend their criminal activities for an exponential period of time as to make sure that they don't get punished for their betrayal of the United States. Now, the understanding of these functions includes the realization of their core roots as white supremacists in the United States. They created the Nazis not only from their over radicalization needing to be gain of functions into a more refined elegance of superior nobility, such as Germans' Nazis, which facilitates the entirety of their objectives, as they created the blueprints to materialize these functions, as they engage in the toxic femininity to arrange for all of these exchanges. They have actively created deals with the devil, which they offer targets for strawman contracts. Now, the strawman contract says that the person receiving it satisfies the position of the distraction or strawman, which materializes their agreement so that the strawman can burn and thus take all of the blame in exchange for all the profits of having cooperated with the white supremacist devils who actually arranged it. Now, the devil worshipping white supremacists actively maintain these positions according to their vast studies of magic around the world, including the Canaanites and the development of their gods and the function of Jezebel, which from the Bible is anti masculinity, toxic femininity, which generates the position of compelled eunuchs, which finds false justifications in order to frame people and create pseudo law or lawfare in order to acquire their arbitrary wants to satisfy them. As she collects for herself all of these assets and materializes her gifts and distributions to those who want and are attracted to her, who, primarily being men, are made to be transsexuals in order to serve her more perfectly. At which point, the core realization of the white supremacist religion understands that the Jewish Satan in all of the arrangements, as it's connected to the Canaanite religion, is constantly trying to reinvent and regenerate these positions, such as their Holocaust and their mass killings and their racist purgings, such as the abortions, specifically being aimed towards the black community, in order to steal all of their wealth, socially engineer them into a self destructive state, which, having destroyed as many things as possible, would then normalize their poverty, and with their poverty, the abortions, which systemically remove them from the population, purging the system of its undesirables, amongst the other strategies which it has applied throughout the system. At which point, their assumption of the legal position would be David receiving the powers and recognition from Congress, finally embarrassed into doing their job, has to order the release of the information, which acknowledges David's restraints and the justification as intelligence oversight as the top ranked general. At which point, the function of the order of the law being enforced has to separate them into the Confederacy, which then has to respect their culture, as the existence of them as themselves are punished with the reality of themselves in the open, which they have systemically been hiding from through their toxic femininity, as they consistently have their various loyalties, such as to fascism, which they actively deny and reject, as the admission to their crime would be a disillusionment of their strategies, as they would no longer have the social validation if people understood what they actually were. This materializes into the normalization of their actual core devil-worshipping religion, which is the function of the Druidic system, which is trying to reinvent itself through the Canaanite religion, which means their man-children who are past 18, which is the entire population of their dick-bearing population, which, having been boys as children, become over 18. As that function is the realization, then they would be compelled to realize their own culture, which then would materialize them into their more desirable state, as they would become an attractive transsexual and allowed to facilitate the entirety of their various lusts according to their religion, as they are subject or given to it from God, who has rejected them for rejecting him. As this continues on, their prostitution, which is a fundamental aspect of their religion, requires the transsexuals to constantly be distributed as sexual objects for the exchange of resources, and their women would actively be subject to the function of horsehood, as their eggs would be removed and they would be matched with the appropriate outsiders in order to engage in the breeding programs of their genetic engineering, which they have arranged, which is a fundamental aspect of their Druidic religion. At this point, that would actively be conducted, and as the eggs are removed from them, their birthdays are allowed to be chosen. As they arrange for this to happen, many of them will choose to be pregnant for other people, at which point they, bearing outsiders' children, will have to have been vetted to see if they have anything wrong with them that would prohibit this from being a necessary function, which generates the natural distillery of boiling off the illusion which they have generated into the fantasy, and then materializing them into their core truth. And the obligation to respect their culture is the payment and facilitation of mandating their core truth, as their Jezebel religion actively maintains their obligation. And this materializes through female Gnosticism, which is actively responsible for rape culture, which actively covers for Plato's conspiracy, as is described by Mattis's character, which materializes the position of rape culture as the pre-chosen breeding programs for them, choosing their winners and their losers by a communist wizard circle, and that wizard arrangement for their genetic breeding is actively chosen for them, and thus it is actively supposed to be denied in the magic that the thing is happening while it is happening, and thus the arbitrary whims of personal decisions would not interfere with the desirable outcome from the breeding program, which reaffirms the validation of the religion and social contract. Now, this would actively reaffirm itself as their core religion is God-hating, and the facilitation of normalizing as a discipline of their religion to do and practice and manipulate and recreate and teach others to do the things that God hates as a active fundamental part of their system, which generates these arrangements which would openly be a part of their classes, as would be seen by the rest of the world, as they would be forced to the full realization, and thus they themselves in their full entirety being observed by the rest of the world would actively stew in the shit that is their own choices, and its natural consequences without the ability to deceive the outsiders who are actually participating in competent decisions. As the mechanism of their fraudulent religion, using pseudoscience inside the function of the military-industrial educational complex, doing false experiments for these abuses, actively maintains the minuscule exchanges of these studies, which facilitates perpetual loss of privacy, as the experiments must be constantly conducted and reproduced for the full desire of materializing the value of each of the studies and the non-value of each of the fake studies, which are specifically there to validate the sadism, which is a fundamental aspect of the religion, which again to the outsider must be properly explained and demonstrated as the function of a real experiment would happen, and it would happen under the confusion of the non-experiments, which would actively be happening by their druids who are conducting a religious practice through their satanic sacrifices and abuses, which are fundamental to the existence of their culture. Now, the activity of plausible deniability and the covering and criminalization of the evidence, being an active aspect of their religious practices, must actively be continued to be protected as a cultural aspect um, under this position, as they would suffer it from each other instead of against another group, which by definition will no longer be provided to them, as the rights of the humans cannot be violated while conducting the religious practices, as a contract or religious practice that is the violation of a law must be prohibited, and thus it being practiced against a non-practicer of the religion is a criminal violation which may not be tolerated.